A Quantum Carol by Joseph Elms. Evan had spent decades making himself unloved and missable. There was not a single solution for which he had not found a problem. It was miraculous in many ways, an anti-miracle. Whenever the winds of good fortune had pushed in his sails, as they do on the naughty and nice alike, he had managed to find a way to use them to direct things into the rocks. The reward for his lifetime efforts was the kind of isolation that only a prisoner in an Arctic gulag could understand. Evan was not a bad man, but all of the candles inside him had snuffed out one by one over the years. He simply had not attended to them when they needed to be sheltered or used them to help light those inside of others. If the curtains are drawn and the lights are out, then no one will come to your door, he often said to himself. The alternative was an invitation to the problems of the world. It was a quiet life. It was so quiet that everyone who had ever cared for him had slowly forgotten that he even existed. Enduring social contact with colleagues at work was a daily struggle for Evan, but became unbearable and exhausting at Christmas. It was not uncommon for him to go home from work during the month of December and lie on the floor of his flat with his leather satchel clasped to his chest for up to an hour, after which he would resurrect himself by carefully turning the valve on the living room radiator by a single increment and sitting against the metal until it heated to body temperature. Occasionally he would suck on a mint humbug to pass the time while he sat there on the floor. They were free to take from a small basket on the desk of the reception in his office. He would put a few in his pocket when no one was looking. You may wonder at this stage what kind of business Evan was involved in, given his ability to unpick and dismantle everything that is good in the tapestry of life. In which industry might this particular skill set be useful, you'll be asking yourself. Evan Cheeser worked for the Department of Work and Pensions. He listened on the phone to the tall tales and melodramas of dole claimers, and then when they had finished, he would explain to them why they were still going to be sanctioned. He loved his job. Find someone to pay you for doing something you love and you'll never work a day in your life, he had once heard someone say. He liked the sentiment of that saying, but had always been uncomfortable with the phrase, never work a day. If he could rewrite that phrase, then he would change it to, work every day. That would be better. But unfortunately, not always possible due to the annual mass hysteria of Christmas that meant the closing of the office for a week. Inexplicably this year, due to an administrative oversight on his own part, Evan had become embroiled in the office Secret Santa. The new office junior, a diminutive and nauseatingly cheerful woman called Tamara, had included him in the raffle of names. She was sufficiently inexperienced to have both assumed that everyone took part and to have left the announcement of the results until the day before they closed the doors for the Christmas week. Tamara's popularity with the staff, due to her relentless positivity, had protected her from criticism, and everyone had gone along with the inconvenience. Evan found himself with a dilemma. If he were to withdraw from the system at this stage, the subsequent workload in terms of social contact, appeasement, apologies and the like would vastly outweigh the relatively tiny amount of social energy it would cost to simply buy something for his colleague. But the thought of spending money on such an absurd and pathetic scheme, and the thought of having to think about other people smiling and being grateful for something they had received as a result of his own labour, was something that made him wish he lived in the North Pole. It was with clenched hands and darting eyes that Evan searched the shelves of the cancer care shop on the night before Christmas Eve. He had set himself boundaries before he left the office. He would only visit this shop and only once in order to acquire something that would suffice for his imposed Secret Santa duties. Something Christmas related, small enough to be wrapped in a single sheet of A3, already procured from the roll on the dusty top shelf of the stationery cupboard, and costing less than £1. It was astonishing how few items met all three criteria. He had all but given up when he noticed something glittering on a shelf that he was sure he was already checked. A little snow globe for 50p. Evan picked it up to examine its condition. It was a diorama of a wooden cabin in an alpine setting. Next to the cabin there was a solitary figure, huddled against the cold, attempting to make it to shelter. He shook the globe, but none of the settled white flakes swirled in the liquid. Perfect, he thought. Now, this may well have been the end of the story. In this normal world in which we think we live, Evan would have exchanged the gifts, gone home and spent Christmas listening to the echoes and muffled voices of other people's joy. His life would have passed in this way until eventually and inevitably he would simply have vanished, unnoticed from the record of the human story. But this is not an ordinary story. Otherwise I wouldn't be asking for the generosity of your time to tell it. And, by the way, I'm not here, let me be clear, I'm not here over here claiming that Christmas magic exists. That's for you to decide. Maybe you've seen it already and know for yourself, or maybe you haven't yet. I will continue. There was something about that figure in the snow globe that intrigued Evan. Later that night he made the unprecedented decision to put on a second light in his flat so that he could inspect it more thoroughly. There were no footsteps in the snow around the figure, despite his huddled posture indicating distress. No evidence that he had either emerged from the trees or from the cabin and thought to turn back. The only reasonable conclusion was that he had stood there for so long in a state of confused indecisiveness that the falling snow had covered his tracks and left him unsure of what way he had come or where to go. It made no sense without the driving snow, but the flakes inside the snow globe seemed stuck to the ground, and it would not disperse into the liquid, no matter how often Evan flipped it over. In frustration, he clasped both hands over the snow globe and shook it hard. Reality, that fluid in which we are all immersed, began to swirl around Evan. He remained fixed in space as the furniture of history was stripped away 100 years at a time. Through the streaks and whirlwinds of time he gaped, as the building he lived in was stripped and dismantled. The lights of Saltcoats became rare and vanished, and the dark and mossy and smothering tides of nature reclaimed the land. Evan floated as gently as an old balloon to the ground and found himself in a time before people walked the earth. For hours he stumbled through the trees and marshes, cautiously pursued by slinking reptiles and furry shadows with eyes and teeth. He resisted crying out. He knew the sound would be futile in a world before the evolution of the human ear. He eventually collapsed to the dirt beside a muddy pool. He wondered if archaeologists in the future would discover his bones and be perplexed, before realising that there would be nothing left when the predators, closing in now, were finished. It was in this moment that he saw something in the dirty water reflecting the moonlight. It was the dome of the snow globe. In desperation he fished it out, clasped both hands over it and shook it hard. Evan was less terrified on his second journey through time. Such was his confidence that the same winds that had sucked him through this streaking tunnel would return him to the same place. But they instead carried him far beyond his little flat with its cold rooms and dim lamp. He passed that scene, like a passenger in a high-speed train passing through a station at which it was not scheduled to stop. Instead, he watched in horror as he entered a time where the sky was perpetually grey, and the gentle slopes and undulations of the land had been flattened, where all of the buildings and grass and life had been systematically removed, and replaced only with flat, geometrically precise and levelled concrete. It was a silent world that he wandered again for hours, parched and mute. No matter how far he walked in any direction, he always seemed to return to the same place. Such was the flawless smoothness of the ground. It was a surface without a texture upon which a marble would not roll if placed down. He once thought he saw a striding robot on the extreme distant horizon, but he may have imagined it. He again thought of crying out, wailing, but he knew that a digital recorder would receive the sound and use it to triangulate his location so that a drone could collect his remains and sterilise the area once he had perished on this concrete continent, on this bloodless planet. A tiny glittering of oasis of light in the distance caught his eye, a single pixel that was like a beacon on the muted landscape. Evan ran towards it for hours, never seeming to get any closer, until he was right beside it. It was the 50p snow globe from the cancer care shop. The third shake took Evan home. What to him had felt like days had taken place in seconds. He staggered to his bed. Tamara, hoping to consolidate the goodwill of her new colleagues after the Secret Santa debacle, opened the office early on Christmas Eve. She sat a chocolate bear wrapped in golden foil on everyone's desk and put the Christmas playlist through the CD player that sat in the reception. She lit a pumpkin spice candle and pulled on a Santa hat. Now, Tamara had, all her life, believed in Christmas magic. She also believed in manifesting, Reiki, and the legitimacy of messages from dead relatives from the spooky woman at the community centre. It was so strong a conviction that she was not completely astonished when Evan Cheeser strode into the office that morning with tears of joy in his eyes and gripped her for a fulsome hug while announcing a heartfelt Christmas greeting. Having already hugged and wished Christmas greetings that morning to the postman, a child shoveling snow from his grandmother's path, and everyone in the queue outside the chemist. Back in Evan's flat, on the windowsill, sat the snow globe. All of the flakes had settled, and the little scene contained within the glass was still and peaceful. The lost figure had made it to the cabin, and from its windows came a soft golden light.